With the release of Alien Romulus, I thought it might finally be a good idea to get into this illustrious franchise. 9 movies later, and I am oh so glad I did. But like with most long-standing franchises, there's bound to be a few weaker ones. And we're going to be ranking all of these films, including the 2 Predator crossovers, right now. Starting with number 9, Aliens vs. Predator Requiem. This one is pretty awful. Now, it's not as offensively horrific as I was somewhat expecting, but it is no doubt a really bad movie and one I never ever want to put myself through again. We'll get the one biggie out of the way early, this movie's magnum opus of awful. The lighting. The majority of this movie either takes place at night or inside of caves or buildings, and they truly do not even attempt to light it, to the point where you very often just have no idea what's even going on. On one hand, it's like the Battle of Winterfell, where you get the contrast between the darkness and the objects on screen, but the contrast just isn't big enough, and it's hard to tell what's going on. Here, sometimes it's just a sea of pitch black blobs in pitch black rooms with pitch black backgrounds. There is no contrast. There is no way to tell what's happening no matter how hard you concentrate. It's hilariously awful. If a real proper top tier film like Whiplash or Saving Private Ryan were lit like this, you could legally score it no higher than like a 6. And this movie ain't Whiplash. Another thing this movie handles almost as poorly as the lighting is the characters. This movie gives us a bunch of characters and only even attempts to make one of them have an interesting story. And then it just kills nearly every single one of them anyways. So why even pretend to invest us in their random romantic and career problems that are not developed in the slightest? The ending is fine. The start is good? Wait, really? Yeah, this start's actually shockingly solid. Like, for real. The first few scenes are interesting and even lit well. It doesn't all fall off a cliff either. Rather, scene by scene, it gets a bit sillier, worse looking, and you start to care a lot less. Meaning you can almost be tricked into thinking this movie might not be all that bad for the first quarter of the runtime or so like I was. There's some cool kills too, and a lot of people complain that this movie goes overboard too much at times in this regard. I would posit the notion that that's kind of what the Alien franchise is. However, it is earned a lot less in this one. We don't even give a fraction of a shit about 90% of the people getting killed, but on paper some of the kills are pretty good, and hey, it's aliens on Earth. Do you think they would abstain from killing children and pregnant women? No. Does that mean this movie had to show us that stuff? Also no. But it's hard to hate that as much as the other stuff in this film, since this is at least the most interesting stuff this movie ever tries. The plot is boring, neither Predator nor Alien receive any notable lore building, interesting development, neat fucking moments. They're just in the film. I think it's very hard to see. The acting is rough, the dialogue is worse, it all comes together to create a very bland movie that you can't see, containing iconic sci-fi characters, meaning it's offensive to the hardcore fans of those franchises. And it gets pretty unduly disturbing, which at best didn't piss people off, like in my case, and at worst was incredibly off-putting to a lot of people. Bad movie, I wish it didn't exist, very, very little I can give it in the way of compliments, moving on. Oh, they also try to pay homage to Arnie's famous line in Predator, a line so famous it transcends that whole franchise. Get to the chopper! And like always in sequels, it rings pretty hollow. But tenfold more here since it is such an iconic line and this is such an undeserving film. Shame. At number 8, we have Alien 3, and this film kinda disgusts me. More so than the last one even. As a film, it's fine. It's pretty boring, slow, bleak in an entirely unenjoyable way, but there's some decent stuff, like the directing and the performances at times. As an Alien film, however, this thing is an abomination, and it deserves 100% of the hate it gets, if not more. Right from the start, it undoes everything from Aliens, killing off Hicks, Bishop, and Newt off-screen as their pod crash lands on a prison planet, obviously carrying an alien, but we'll get to that later. Ripley is sad, but not enough. Call it shock, trauma, disbelief, whatever. Her daughter, for all intents and purposes, dies, and after her initial single-scene grieving, where she's more concerned with whether or not she was infected with alien shit, she completely forgets Newt even existed. And Hicks barely even gets a single mention. Her relationship with Newt was aliens. It was excellent growth for Ripley. Compelling, touching. Did I think her and Hicks were gonna land somewhere safe and raise Newt as a happy little family? No, but they could have dangled that carrot for just a little bit longer, and if this movie was going to go for the awful decision of killing Newt off screen, then her death and Ripley's resulting trauma should be ever present throughout the entire film. It should be one of the key elements to the movie, not something she brushes off as easily as she brushed off every other death that happened around her. As the movie progresses, it's just boring. All of these movies follow the same formula, and this is the one that understood why that formula worked so well the least. They gave us an ensemble cast, but then they didn't give us any reason to care for a single one of them. In fact, they actually tell us many times that we should hate every single one of them for being violent rapists and murderers. That's why they're secluded from society on the prison planet in the first place. They only expand on the lore of the alien ever so slightly, giving us a twinge of insight into their life cycle, but then they completely forgot to give us any cool, unique kills. On paper, the idea of this movie being extra grim, cold, and hopeless isn't inherently bad, but they lean into it pretty heavily, and they don't give us any characters to connect with or give a shit with. So these themes and moments of impending death just fall flat. This movie could be seen as a metaphor for terminal illness, as the prisoners accept their fate as the movie winds down, knowing they can hope for little else aside from taking the alien down with them. But it's hard to let these emotions impact you deeply when the vessel for these themes are the absolute scum of the universe feeling sad they're about to die, when this universe and all of its other characters have told us time and time again that they don't even deserve to be alive as it is. Ripley's pretty underwritten and doesn't have all that much to do, and overall this thing just sucks, man. If this movie just sucks shit like it does, then whatever, but the fact that they desecrated aliens in the process, I think I hate this movie as much as any movie I've ever seen. And when you learn more about the behind the scenes stuff, it becomes even grosser. It's confirmed that they essentially wrote however much of the script as they could, not all of it, not even the majority of it. Then they shot those scenes, filmed them, then began editing them, while simultaneously writing the rest of the movie. They started filming before the script was even finished. David Fincher said they didn't go back for reshoots like you hear so often, they just went back to film the rest of the movie. The actors apparently stopped reading the scripts ahead of time because they learned that if there was enough time for them to memorize their scene, there was enough time for it to get changed. So they just resorted to reading their parts right before filming them. David Fincher, by the way, has denounced this movie, essentially acting as though it isn't even a part of his filmography since he had such little control on how the final product turned out. He was this movie's third director after all, and he did about as well as he could have. I haven't watched the assembly cut yet, a newer cut of the film that adds 40 minutes and supposedly improves a lot of this movie's flaws. I certainly will, but I've heard mixed things about the assembly cut and I can't envision a world in which it turns this into a good movie, but I could see it improving some smaller stuff. However, at the cost of an additional 40 whole minutes of this drab shit, it might not even be worth it. I do not like this movie. At its core, at face value, behind the scenes, none of it works for me. As far as the non-crossover Alien movies go, this one is comfortably at the bottom. As I'm writing this, I'm having a hard time remembering why I ranked AVP 2 below it. I guess that one fails far more as a film, but neither the AVP movies feel like a real Alien film anyways. So this one pisses me off a lot more, while technically not being worse. Which I guess brings us to number 7, Alien vs. Predator. Alien vs. Predator it's okay. I don't know. The premise is pretty good. The setup is actually kind of hype too, where the Predators have an alien queen in captivity and use it to create xenomorphs for the Predators to hunt. This movie definitely spends a little too much time on the humans, and I know this franchise is known for slow starts, but this one I felt benefited from that slow start the least. It's nearly halfway into the film before we first see a Predator and alien go toe to toe, and almost nothing before that has any real intrigue. We all know what we're here watching this movie for. To wait that long before giving it to us is blasphemy, but I digress. However, that first encounter is pretty solid. It looks fun, and generally when you've got an alien or a Predator on your screen, you're not having a bad time. The setup for why the humans go to this ancient Predator hunting ground is good. Bringing in Weyland-Yutani despite this very much functioning as a Predator film with aliens in it, which my alien bias didn't quite fancy, wasn't a fan of that decision. If they were going to lean in one direction, I'd have much rather it been the aliens, and I think a premise of the Predators going hunting on a new planet already overrun with aliens could have easily been an excellent setup where we see the aliens have the advantage. Actually, what they could have done is given us that type of idea for the sequel, but instead we got, well, I don't even know what we got, I couldn't really see it. Well, at least in that movie it's not PG-13. Oh, sorry, did I not mention that part? The first Alien vs. Predator is PG-13. PG-13. Alien vs. Predator. Yeah, you know those franchises known for killing every single member of the ensemble cast, leaving a sole survivor beaten and traumatized to shit, one of which specializes in sexual gruesome body horror? Yeah, no, let's make it okay for kids. PG-13. Hey, have you seen the trailer for the new Lego Batman movie? Oh, it's not actually Lego though, this one. A bafflingly stupid, asinine decision that 100% affects the quality of this film. Right when I first saw a chestburster born with the camera focused on the girl's face, then panning down quickly to a veg hole with zero blood, I was having a fucking hard time staying on board. But whatever, once we slog through the human shit, which honestly isn't even that bad, they're interesting enough with a decent setup. The back half of this movie is pretty solid. Seeing both the monsters' powers on full display is great, and it is cool to see them lock onto each other and watch as one emerges on top. It's almost never a straight up brawl with a winner, they get decently creative with how each one survives the encounter. The plot gets pretty wild with the Predators being the ones to teach humans how to build the pyramids and our main human teaming up with a Predator, but I'd say it's wild in a fun way. It fits in with the rest of the insanity of the movie. The action is solid, the plot is fine, the designs are pretty good, the sets are good in terms of the pyramids, but scene by scene a lot of moments are boring gray stone, which is unfortunate. This movie's just a pure 6 across the board, with a few big caveats that hold it back, namely the PG-13 rating that truly just makes no fucking sense. As an Alien movie, not great. Better as a Predator movie, although it breaks lore a fair bit. It's easy enough to just sort of ignore that, though I'm sure if this went against Alien lore, I'd be pretty offended. And it's funny to say things like being offended by this film, as if it's that kind of film that can have that sort of effect. I think this should just be looked at through the lens of a dumb action flick, and it's not too bad at that. I'm not glad this thing exists, I'm not livid that it does, I'm just aware of the fact that it's around and I don't really have any interest in ever revisiting it again. If I could bother you for just one moment, and I promise I'll keep this short, but please consider subscribing if you like this sort of stuff and want to help support the channel. As a newer, smaller channel, I really want to continue growing and eventually release content far more often, and an easy, free way you can help is just by clicking that little button if it's something you're interested in. If not, no worries either way, I just hope you enjoy the video. Now back to some aliens. And that ends the bad ones. The rest of this franchise consists of good movies I quite like, that I have a ton of interest in rewatching and think about positively far more than negatively. The worst of these is Alien Covenant, which is probably the weirdest one of these for me. I don't have any huge problems with it, but I also found it the least compelling of the bunch. The David Walter stuff is excellent. Truly top tier stuff. If you don't like the direction they went with David, committing genocide to the engineers, experimenting with a pathogen, and creating a gaggle of new aliens, that's fair. Much like with Prometheus, this can just be a direction for the franchise you're not particularly interested in, but Michael Fassbender teaching himself to play the flute, linguistically sparring, waxing philosophically, and then kissing himself? Yeah, check your pomp at the door. This shit's good, and Michael Fassbender plays both roles so well. Everything regarding David in this film is excellent. Right from his first scene is a brief glimmer of hope before swiftly revealing himself to be the Antichrist, demolishing and creating new life as he pleases. Walter is a little less interesting, but his role in this film functions more as a foil to David, so he's great. Everything else, just whatever. Nothing terrible, just maybe a bit boring. A lot of the kills are great, the aliens look great, the whole movie does honestly. If you like the cold dark spaceship setting, which God knows I do, then nothing beats the first one. But for pure scenery and spectacle, this and Prometheus are hard to beat. But we learned basically nothing about these characters, and our main character is by far the least focused on or fleshed out protagonist we've had yet, to the point where I don't even really think of her as the main character, just one of the many people we don't really learn or care about. Also, quick note, if you hear me say anything like worst in the franchise or least impactful in the franchise, anything like that going forward, just know I'm excluding the AVP ones. They contain the brunt of the worst, least important shit, and as such it seems superfluous to constantly have to say, this movie's the most blank, aside from AVP 2. You know? In regards to Covenant though, I have a really hard time excusing a lot of the dumb shit these characters do here, particularly compared to the other films. They wear zero protection as they explore the planet. They split up, they don't send out Walter beforehand, they trust David immediately when he's clearly being a creepy bitch. This entire scene. Oram's still just trusting David for no reason and practically leaping into the scariest looking orifice you've ever seen in your entire life, and there's a gaggle more. You can kinda do this with a fair amount of decisions and moments in Prometheus too, but where that movie either offers us potential reasonings or provides us with enough gaps to fill in the blanks ourselves, this movie just doesn't. There's something about Covenant that didn't connect with me, despite me still liking it and thinking it was quite good. I think this is the one I need to rewatch the most. I wouldn't be shocked if I liked it more the second time around, especially if I watched those additional scenes on YouTube which flesh out the characters and lore a bit. Crazy that that's a sentence and something people might have to actually do to further appreciate this movie, but alas, that's the case here. Even if the ending was pretty predictable, it was still presented to us really well. It was chilling and creepy and offered us some more questions and ideas to be explored. And if we don't get the final movie in the David trilogy, I might slowly lean my whole face into an overmorph just so the misery can overcome me. Not bad. Good movie, but it feels more forgettable than it had any right being, and it feels like it lacks an impact on the franchise despite introducing us to massive new concepts. Covenant gets like a 7 with a question mark, which is still pretty good. At number 5, we have Alien Resurrection, which is sort of my guilty pleasure film. When I first delved into this franchise, I had a few people tell me that after the first two, they stopped being good. And I hated Alien 3 with a passion, so I was pretty ready to buy into that thought process, and yet Resurrection reeled me in, like, right away. Quite literally, within the first chunk of this movie, the plot being established is just interesting, and it's presented to us really well. We get a resurrected Ripley in the form of a clone they'd failed 7 times before, and the clone is carrying DNA from the alien queen, and as such, the resulting clone is grown with a xenomorph embryo inside it. They harvest the xenomorph and use it to produce more, so now we finally have captured xenomorphs in a protected military structure. That is just a fun-ass concept, a very natural progression from the earlier movies, as this has always been the company's ultimate goal, and Ripley has remained very steadfast in opposing them, even going so far as killing herself in the last film to deny them this goal. Although this is a decent departure from the ending of 3, having Ripley be back after losing her most notably, I still think it respects the franchise more and gives us an interesting premise, something Alien 3 disgustingly failed at on both accounts. Now, the fact that the people behind this research aren't Weyland-Yutani is pretty dumb and infuriating, to be honest, but it doesn't really affect things moment by moment, though it definitely hurts the overall product. This is kind of akin to killing off Hicks, and namely Newton the third one, but arguably even more egregious killing off the company since Weyland had solidified itself as such an integral force of this franchise. Something like Gotham is to Batman, a non-character entity that just matters so much. I cannot excuse this decision, and I would do a great many things to retcon it.
In the company? Weyland-Yutani.
Oh, they went under decades ago. Get him in way before your time. Bought out by Walmart.
Likewise, this movie is not remotely without its other flaws. The dialogue can be pretty cringy when it's at its best, and when it's at its worst, it's very clearly written by Joss Whedon. The piss filter over the whole film sucks too. It rarely, if ever, looks good at all, and it kinda just makes every single shot and scene about 5% worse. I really wish they would have foregone this aesthetic, especially with how gorgeous this franchise had been before and after. Also, why is there basketball in this one? But regardless, the rest of the movie is just fun. It's easily the most pure dumb fun this franchise ever gets, with plucky side characters and gruesome visuals. I was surprised and very enamored by how serious this franchise takes itself, something that very likely plays a large role in me liking a certain movie we'll talk about shortly here. And I was also pleasantly surprised by how much this movie grew on the alien mythos, introducing a new hybrid that sees Ripley as its true mother, resulting in a surprisingly effective final scene of Ripley killing said alien. They managed to squeeze a lot of genuine heartbreak out of this alien's eyes, and that combined with Ripley doing what had to be done but feeling a twinge of sorrow hit me pretty good. I like this Ripley just enough, being pretty dark and edgy and also now superpowered. Pretty dumb, but considering she killed herself in the last one, I like that this wasn't just our Ripley. I think this works better. I think this movie could have been made a lot better with minor fixes like improved dialogue and better visuals, but as it stands, I like this one, and I don't really see a rewatch hurting or enhancing it. At number 4, the second most difficult placement on this list, we have Alien Romulus, which was outstanding. This movie's release was why I got into all these movies after all. However, that's not because this movie received widespread critical acclaim or glowing word-of-mouth recommendations. Though initially received quite positively, I think, the thing that really convinced me was the poster. This thing is amazing. Terrifying, evocative, intriguing. I knew nothing of the alien mythos aside from the first two being S-tier movies and the Xenomorph being a sci-fi icon, and that combined with the draw from this poster was enough to reel me in. But how did this movie actually hold up? After watching 8 alien films beforehand, you might think it suffered from some form of burnout, but no. This is the most pure alien film since 1986, and I loved it to pieces. Starting with the bad, since there's so little, the Rook-Ash stuff was a bit off, but I mostly just hated it because the actor had passed away prior to filming. I didn't know that at the time, and as such I just thought it was poor de-aging. Story-wise, it does make sense to give us this android who, although not our actual Ash, is the same model and harkens back to our distrust of the slimy, sleazy Weyland-Yutani. And it also makes sense since this movie chronologically comes between Alien and Aliens. I think they could have achieved a similar effect through different means, and it does taint this film that they use his likeness and that it's not entirely convincing. Didn't wreck the movie, barely even knocked it down a peg, but it was the only pure negative from this movie I can think of. You can't really say it starts off slow because that's just like saying this movie featured xenomorphs and spaceships, but the build-up throughout the first half was handled great, and this movie gave us 2 of our most compelling characters to date. Rain was super interesting, super charming, a really effective protagonist for this franchise, and one I desperately hope gets her own trilogy or more just like Ripley. It would be nice to give this franchise some focus, let us watch her entire story unfold. It'd be a bit tricky since it's set between 2 of our earlier films, but it's not like the conclusion to her story was going to be eradicating the xenomorph race or anything. I just want to see more of her in this world. She was fantastic. And likewise with Andy, a character very deserving of the title of the series' best synthetic, except unfortunately David exists.
Hello. I'm David.
But he's incredible nonetheless and serves a different role where we as the audience are rooting for him and we love him as opposed to just being drawn in by how captivating and terrifying David is. Both of these actors, Kaylee Spaney and David Johnson, do a remarkable job, and I'd love to see Andy journey alongside Rain as this franchise progresses. They utilize his character in such creative ways, and they utilize their aliens and expand on their biology in much the same fashion. The zero-gravity acid scene as well as the facehugger scene where they match the room's temperature to their body temperature to remain hidden was brilliant, and we even get a new form of alien hybrid in the form of yeah, that one scene. And did that final scene work for me? Fuck yes, because these movies have shattered me on an emotional and spiritual level, and because one of the highest compliments I can pay this franchise is how wonderfully they handle the final moments of most films, keeping the tension and horror sky high right until the bitter end. This sort of scene couldn't have worked better for me. I hated it. It was perfect. Largely due to it being the most modern Alien movie, it looked just incredible. The perfect blend of practical and VFX, and it also revealed a layer to my growing list of Alien's classic tropes that I found very amusing. Alien is a pretty formulaic franchise, and I don't mean that as pejorative. Nearly every entry contains an ensemble cast led by a female protagonist where the vast majority of the cast die by the end except for the protagonist and 1 or 2 lucky others, a slow as shit first half and a lengthened bombastic second half, aliens, disgusting body horror, some sort of ticking clock narrative as a climax, and large chunks of the film taking place inside a spaceship. But there's one more core tenet these movies hardly ever stray from that I didn't really realize until Romulus. The main characters are all highly competent space people. Until now. Yeah, they've got some knowledge and they're not idiots, but compared to other movies, they're the first cast to be severely out of their depths as they try to accomplish their initial goal. It's endearing, and a nice, simple juggling of this franchise's usual beats. Romulus is great. More of this, please. I loved it. And now for the movie I was oh so tempted to place at number 4, but just barely gave the edge over Romulus too. We have Prometheus. This movie is incredible. Absolutely not what I wanted from this franchise. If Prometheus were directed by anyone other than Ridley Scott himself, the premise and departure from the franchise's typical beats likely would have put me off entirely. And unfortunately, it has done exactly that for a great many people. And it can become hard to give this movie a fair shake when you reject so much of what it's trying to be. I, on the other hand, was enamored with this movie right from the start. The visuals are gorgeous, and they create a wonderful contrast to the initial hope and optimism the crew have before it starts turning into despair and carnage. The cast is as good as ever, and Shaw is a great protagonist, simply beaming with a justified sense of anticipation, something we really haven't seen before. This movie's resident synthetic, David, as we've mentioned several times already, is fucking phenomenal, and it feels offensive to lump him in with the rest of the largely enjoyable androids in this franchise since David is so much deeper, more complex, and more intriguing. Played masterfully by Michael Fassbender, he's not only the sole member of this movie to be featured in the sequel, but he's so popular and important to the narrative and lore that people refer to the much desired third movie as the conclusion to the David trilogy. Everything involving David kicks his movie up several notches in every direction. Lore-wise, I think this movie, alongside Covenant, leave just enough still up in the air for my liking. I hated the idea of the engineers creating the xenomorphs. As I said before, I didn't particularly think this franchise needed a movie like this before I actually watched it. Them being the creators of the human race is fine, but leave my killer aliens alone. How little we knew about and understood xenomorphs was like half their appeal through the first 30 years of this franchise. But I think Prometheus left enough unanswered to the point where we retain that original mystery of what the hell these aliens are and where they come from. I don't think we should ever have those questions outright answered. But for Prometheus' sake, the concept of meeting God, having it regard you with confusion and then disgust while learning it plans to eradicate your entire species without so much as an explanation? harrowing. Their design is great. How they finally stumble across what seems to be the race's final survivor is great. The opening to this movie featuring the engineer drinking the ever-important black goo is incredible. I've always loved the parasitic nature of the aliens and how they take on traits from their host, resulting in so many different forms of them. And my god, that ending? An engineer being impregnated by a facehugger the size of Starro resulting in the Deacon? A supposed proto-xenomorph? A scene rivaled only by one, of course, where Shaw gives herself a C-section to remove the aforementioned facehugger from her stomach, which was accidentally implanted there by Holloway via intercourse after he was infected by the black goo, administered covertly by David. I don't want to just give you a plot summary, but I would be remiss if I left out any of those details. Each one just builds off the last, creating one of the best scenes in the entire franchise. Obviously, this movie is not without its faults. Sadly, it has a few of them, and try as I might, I can only excuse some of them. The characters are often very stupid. This is extra notable considering they're all top of their field scientists on an immensely important to humanity mission, but here's where I actually can start making some excuses for them. One, a few of the people here are only there to cash a paycheck and don't really buy into the mission statement, a classic Alien staple. So they don't take things as seriously as they should. Not nearly a good enough excuse. However, something that might be is how Sean Holloway's outlook plays a role in their doom as well. They see this as a reconnaissance mission, a friendly one to learn about humanity. She goes so far as to specifically tell her crew not to bring weapons. She doesn't think this mission could possibly contain violence. I think if you look at some of the decisions made throughout the first half of this movie and see it from her eyes, it's like walking through heaven and looking for booby traps. That's a cool thing I just said. It doesn't excuse these idiots taking off their helmets and trying to pet space worms and forgetting they can run sideways to avoid the falling donut. So, you win some and you lose some. And with all of that being said, the philosophical nature of this film just really did it for me, and I think the franchise needed this after growing a little stale in audiences' eyes after the prior two films. This, combined with Covenant, leave enough to the imagination that they didn't rewrite or wreck the origins of the xenomorph we know and love. It gave us iconic characters, scenes, kills, deepened the lore tremendously, and showed us that this franchise didn't need to be confined to a cold, dark spaceship setting. I genuinely love this movie, and it's the one I want to rewatch the most, and I almost guarantee my thoughts on it will change in one way or another once I finally do. And finally, on to the other tough decision, one of the toughest in all of film. Not many franchises could ever hope to boast as magnificent a first two films as this one. But what's my number 2? Alien. This movie is so damn good, man. The perfect example of how to handle a sequel, and I will not argue with anyone who thinks this movie is the best Alien film of all time. It's just that good, and it really is neck and neck with the first one. It ticks off every box that makes for a successful sequel. It expands the lore, it fits very naturally into the universe, it expands the characters, in this case just being Ripley, and it's a very natural continuation of the story. It fits magnificently in that same category as other S-tier sequels, ones on par with or even better than their originals, like The Dark Knight, Blade Runner 2049, Shrek 2, Empire Strikes Back, among others. More focused on action this time around, Alien still featured more than enough gruesome, horrifying shit to keep the fans of the horror elements in Alien captivated while appealing to newer fans alike. I think if you were to show these two movies to people who weren't already fans of the genre or franchise, Aliens would be the more widely liked one for its louder plot and more relentless storytelling. Though it still features the Alien franchise trademark of starting slow as shit. But this movie earns that slow start as well as any other in the franchise by setting up the stakes and premise of the movie in an engaging, compelling way. God, I have used that phraseology far too often throughout this script. Sorry, it's just often very apt. Despite said slower start, there is zero wasted screen time. Though my only real critiques with this film might lie in that first quarter or so when the company doesn't believe her and then she's recruited on the mission. Her agreeing to join just seems a bit thin, maybe you could argue even rushed, and the company not believing her just doesn't really go anywhere. I thought it might be a pervasive theme throughout that she's all alone and outcasted, but not really. The movie doesn't believe her, and then a few scenes later they believe her so much that she's begged to come along as an advisor. I know these are different people, but it's still the movie itself telling us one thing then going back on it, and these two entities aren't presented as opposites. They're essentially the exact same thing, in fact. The company. Not bad, just slightly weaker aspects of an incredible film, and so back to that incredible stuff. The stakes are higher in this movie, as we not only have Ripley to care about, but also Newt, and you could even vaguely lump Hicks into this category as well, since the first one never really gave us a number 2 to Ripley we particularly cared about. Likewise, in the first one they're trying to escape from a single alien, and here they give us a whole fucking hive of the bastards and a queen, which again fits perfectly with the first movie. Some franchises mess up the whole one monster in the first movie, now multiple monsters in the second one, because we understand the monster and how to defeat them too well. Aliens does not suffer from this, because they not only add additional elements to the xenomorph, but the mystery of them and what made them so terrifying in the first one remains. Now there's just more of them. And the movie gets around this fact by having our humans actually stand a chance in a creative, fitting way. In the first film, they're not soldiers or well armed. They're jumped by this thing of evil and it picks them off one by one while they learn precious little about it. Here, they're elite Marines, a whack of them in fact, on a mission to destroy these aliens. They don't really know what they're getting themselves into, but they're armed and trained, and as such they have a fighting chance, and it doesn't reduce the aliens to generic monsters for our characters to kill en masse. They balance the deadly nature of these aliens with a realistic but difficult ability to kill them incredibly well. Throughout, we explore Weyland more and learn how this company operates, and we get an excellent sort of twist villain with Burke, who is wonderful to hate. We get a character dynamic that was largely absent from the first film with Ripley and Newt. There's practically nothing to dislike here and a ton to love. This movie is just as important and impactful as the first one, and while Aliens started this franchise, Aliens built off it so perfectly and ultimately might be just as responsible for giving us the iconic franchise we know and love today. However, Alien is a perfect movie. I can't say that for many other films, but I really think I can here. The tension, the atmosphere, the setting, the pacing. Although a bit slow at the start, what else is new? It's pretty necessary and only helps the movie down the line as its flow of information, tension, and horror benefit from more time to breathe out the gate. The iconic xenomorph is masterfully created and conceptualized, and it looks really solid throughout the film. All of the credit in the world goes out to H.R. Geiger and company. Although nearly every movie in this franchise built on the lore of these aliens in one way or another, it's incredible just how much of the building blocks of the xenomorph come from this first movie. The life cycle, from ovomorph egg to facehugger to chestburster, which quickly grows into a full-size xenomorph. The acidic interior, black, slimy exterior, penchant for stealth and violence, and ridiculous durability. This franchise is cool as shit, since so many movies within it tackle different genres, but I think it is at its best when it's a straight-up horror film, and Romulus only further confirmed that notion. The acting is great, the plot is creative and perfect to drive the story right where Ridley Scott wants it to go. Establishing the company, Weyland-Yutani, which grows into its own vicious entity within this universe. Like the Alien itself, it's built upon as we progress the franchise, but it's established so wonderfully here. Where I give this movie the slightest of nods over Aliens is just how flawless it is. I have minor gripes with Aliens, but I can't even come up with any bullshit nitpicks for this one. It also looks amazing, the definition of pristine cinematography. And on a vaguely unrelated note, the trailer for this movie has long been heralded as one of the best trailers in history, so we'll throw this movie its flowers for that as well. It's even got a cat that survives this entire movie's carnage. This movie really is perfect. The birth of one of the most iconic franchises in history, you could never hope for a better first entry into a franchise than this. It's held up remarkably well, and you can feel the effect this movie has had on the film industry in oh so many ways. From monster design to world building to how to handle tension and sound design, its impact can be felt everywhere, and it remains one of the most pure 10 out of 10 films I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing. Thank you, Alien. To me, this franchise is incredibly easy to tier list, and I thought that might be a fun way to end this video. Alien and Aliens slide into S tier, while Prometheus and Romulus comfortably occupy the A tier. Resurrection and Covenant, while lovely in their own right, create a really strong B tier. Alien vs Predator is D tier? C tier. I feel like a tier of separation between these guys is necessary. And then Alien 3 and AVP 2 are F tier. My only consideration is perhaps I could put AVP in C tier, Alien 3 in D tier, and AVP 2 in F tier. But no, I like Alien 3 being an F tier, honestly. For now, at least. I sincerely hope the assembly cut forces my hand and turns this into an Alien movie I can more readily enjoy. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you like this kind of stuff and want to help support the channel. A single subscription, like, or comment goes such a long way, truly. Until next time, take care.